Hello guys, welcome back to the channel Joey the Chiwi. In today's video, I'm going to share you a book. I think this book is a must read. If you are interested in economy, finance, investment, and a little bit of history. This book is called The Great Depression, a Diary by Benjamin Roth. So why this book is a must read, why I think everyone that loves economy and a little bit of history should read this book, is because we all have heard of the Great Depression. That's probably the darkest time of the US history, right? People lost jobs and lost money and everyone was like pretty much poor, and bank runs and corrupt officials and just all of things going on. So the thing with me is I've learned this Great Depression from textbook, history book only. But what exactly happened during the Great Depression? I mean, I've lived through the 2008, the depression, or people call it depression, but I was still at school at that time, I mean at uni. So I didn't really have the first-hand experience either. And also that time, I wasn't living in the US, I was living in China. So I didn't really have been affected or impacted in some way. But now, as I grew older and started investing and all that, and then I realized, what am I going to react if a depression happened again? If something happened to my investment fund, how am I going to react? How am I going to cope if I lost my job, if I lost 90% of my investment? So I'll give you a figure from this book. During the Great Depression and in late 1929, some of the stock in the US market, and this is how much they have decreased. A stock called Sheet and Tube went down from $175 to $6. Republic went from $140 to $2. Yes, you heard it right, $2. US Steel went from $200 down to $20. Basically lost 90%. So I want you that watching this video to think, if the Tesla stock you invested, say for example, the cost is $300, and when you wake up and we'll check your phone, it shows $30. Is it a glitch? No, it's not a glitch. It's when depression happens, that happens. I want you to think about it. How are you going to prepare yourself for this? Are you going to panic? I think I will. But after the panic, what are you going to do? What can you do? So I also want to learn how the ordinary American people cope during the Great Depression. I mean, that was tough, right? But people still lived through. I mean, some people unfortunately lost their lives due to losing everything in their life. But the people that lived through, what happened to them? How can they live through? How can they survive? So I can better prepare myself if something like this happens again in the future. But let's touch wood here. So just a little bit background of the author, Benjamin Roth. So Benjamin was a law practitioner living in a small town called Youngstown in Ohio. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of this town. So Youngstown was a very prosperous town that heavily focused on the steel production. Because of the World War I, the Europe was ruined, so they need a lot of steel to rebuild their homeland. And the US steel factory all start running 100% or over 100% capacity to basically fit that demand in that European steel market. So that little town was prosperous during the early 1920s up right to 1929. People had money. What did they do? They spent the money. Some people, they speculate on stocks. They invest or speculate, should I use the correct word, on the real estate and lots of other things people spend on. because people had money. And all of a sudden in October, one day in October 1929, when the stock market crash hits, bam, most people lost their whole life savings or investments. And you can tell from the stats I just told you at the beginning of the video, so people couldn't cope, right? So this author, Benjamin, he was a law practitioner and he witnessed the whole period through. So he decided to write down a diary to record what happened, like what he saw and what he heard and the stories. So after reading this book, it's like I've relived the whole Great Depression from 1929 to 1941. Even after the Depression, he kept putting in insurance because this Great Depression actually lasted a very long time. And what I wanna tell you in this video, or what share with you rather, is from the textbook that I learned. Well, because I was in China, right? So the history was written by the Chinese government. So in that time, the evil capitalist, they had milk, they had food, but they would rather dump them, put in the drain, than giving to the starving. And I was like, wow, that's pure evil, right? That's pure evil capitalist. Why are they so evil? Why are they not giving away food to the poor, to the starving? And the answer is in this book. It's because, first of all, those people are not capitalists. Those people are the farmers. And they suffered as much as how other people, ordinary folks, suffered. Because of the demand, people had money really high for farms, for meat, for eggs and all that, milk. So the farmers, what happened was they took loans and they start what's the right word? To upscale, right? To upscale all their production line. And if they didn't have money, they took a debt to do that. And when the Great Depression happened, the demand slumped and they couldn't afford to pay back the debt. And also, for the meat or the milk or the eggs, it was in the farmland, right? It's in the farm, and they need the transportation cost and other labor cost. And to have those products transported to the city or the town to have them sold. And that cost is so high that if they do that, they will practically lose money. So they would rather put those milk, pour them down the drain, than selling them. And I remember vividly from the book that because some farmers they couldn't pay the debt, so their farms, the bank says, too bad, sorry, we gotta confiscate your farm. Those farmers, they like really united together and have guns on them, and basically says, who dare to take my farm? I'm gonna shoot you. Man, that was not a pleasant scene that during that time. And another thing from this book that also shocked me is because of the soldiers from the World War I. They were promised by the U.S. government to pay a pension to them, but that pension won't be paid until 1945. But when the Depression happened, people lost their money, they cannot live. So they demand the Congress, the government, to pay their pension early. Man, if you read the book, you know how ugly that is. It started from a little gathering, and then it became a national campaign. And all those soldiers marched to Washington D.C. and started. It's like occupying Wall Street, a little bit like occupying the Wall Street, if you can remember what happened during that time. So they camped outside of the Washington D.C., the White House, and demanding the government to pay them their pension released there early. So this author told us a lot of stories like this that you probably wouldn't have heard from the history book. right? You have to read this book to know all those details, little things, to give you a full picture of what happened during that darkest time of the United States. And so, people were really living a tough life. I think in this book, it says during the peak time, the population of Youngstown is close to 140,000 people. And during the darkest time of the Great Depression, 40,000 people are unemployed. Can you imagine that? One third of the whole town, the population, had no job, no income. So you can imagine what would like be, And there'll be riots, there'll be robberies, murders, and people are depressed, taking their own lives, and the things like a hell, basically. That's my own word. And some people managed to get through. And in 1936, the depression, I think, slowly coming back, and I think recovered. And also another interesting thing is, while reading this diary, I don't take whatever the author said as for granted, because I also had this SP 500 charts along with me. So because of the diary or the date, I can say on the date, the author said the stock market crashed or had a revival increased. I can actually say from the SP 500 charts, it's actually correct. Every single entry, the author said the stock market recovered, or on this day the stock market was stagnant or plummeted. It was correct. So I can say what was written in this book, diary, it's all correct. It's nothing made up. Okay. And another thing I want to share with you from reading this book is the psychology and the behavior people, the author noticed, because they lost money in this Great Depression period. So when the market started to recover, and people had this mentality of, well, I lost money in the Great Depression, I have to make this back. So rather than learning the lesson from the Depression, how they lost money because they speculated, right? They will double down. They do it again because they want to recoup the loss from the Great Depression. And we all know that ain't gonna end well. So people that did that ended up losing everything all over again. And this is only one of the lessons or one of the observations the author Benjamin noticed. And there's another one. So he has given some sound advice after observing how business suffered and ordinary folks suffered as well. Is he actually put down the basic lesson he learned is to actually having an emergency fund, personally and also in business. So if you don't have an emergency fund, when things like this happened, you are dead pretty much. You have no buffer, okay? You can't even fight back. And what he noticed was the people that actually kept cash aside, and when the Great Depression happened, they bought the market at the bottom. And for those people, the return was like really good. Yeah, it was a great return. So it's very important to have liquid or emergency fund on the side. And another story that I noticed from this book is Benjamin noted the two friends or two people he was dealing business with. Is one person speculated. So this happened actually after 1936. So when the American already actually started recover from the Great Depression, that person kept speculating on a stock and lost everything. Yeah, and another person he made some money in the stock market, but he put that money he earned rather than investing and saving, he put that onto real estate and speculated on real estate and lost everything all over again. When 1937, another plunge happened in 1937. So he lost everything again. And another story he mentioned in the book, as observation, that's all the lesson he learned for himself is the only people I know that made money throughout the Great Depression up to the end of 1930s is the one who bought by cash and hold outright, rather than doing in and out, trading the stocks. You buy, you hold outright. End of the day, you have great return. Yeah, that's another lesson we learned from this book, or he learned from this book. And also apply to us, to our current investment environment as well, right? The law never changed. If you trade, then likely you probably lost money. If you speculate, you trade things that you don't even know, I would say 99% of time, you eventually will lose everything. Another thing that I noticed is when in Benjamin's diary, he wrote down what he noticed, right? He noted down what he saw, but he also wrote down what he saw from the paper, from the Economist. You know, that time, economists making all the predictions and think, oh, this is going to happen, or this probably that going to happen. And the funny thing is, most of the prediction by the economists are wrong. Yeah, people always say, well, you can't always predict the market, you can't always predict the stock, how they perform, you can't predict the economy. And that's true, that people that we think are highly qualified in this certain period, in certain fields like economists, most of the time, they got it wrong. Another thing I love about this book is he not only wrote what happened on that day, he also came back and wrote, put supplement entry and say, okay, in that time, he thought this is what's going to happen, and he recommended you do this and that, or he predicted the market, how the market should behave. And then he came back, say a year later or two, or even 10 years later, he came back and put out the entry and say, okay, so this decision that time was correct, or that prediction that time was actually he got it all wrong. That's what I like about this book as well. And I don't think there was too many people actually talking about this book on YouTube or the internet. So if you happen to stumble upon this video and you love economy, finance, investments, I strongly recommend you to read this book, The Great Depression, a diary by Benjamin Roth, so you can better prepare yourself what happened, and also hopefully you can learn some lessons from reading this book as well that you can apply to your current investments or economy or even your psychological, so how you can better prepare yourself if this happens again in the future. Okay, right, so that's all for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.